Harry Green writes, hey, what do you think a comedy film needs to have in order to win Best Picture? Is it a great narrative, cast, or unforgettable ending? I believe the last comedy film to get nominated was Tootsie, 1982, and to win was Annie Hall, 1977.
Yeah, it's a really great question that comes up a lot about the comedies. Here's the thing. Comedies need to do just what any other film does, which is don't just do one thing great. If you're going to be an action film, that's great, but don't just do the action great. Have other things that are great as well. If you're going to be a comedy, that's great, but don't just have a lot of laughs, although that is the most important thing for a comedy, obviously. But if you want to be considered one of the great films of the year, add more than that. Now, here's the interesting thing. You mentioned that Tootsie was the last one to be nominated, which is if you haven't seen Tootsie, by the way, watch Tootsie. It stands up.
It's hysterical.
It totally stands up. That movie's hilarious. But here's the thing. Tootsie was more than just funny. It was actually a really interesting movie when we look at what the issues it was addressing. I would contend that other comedies have been nominated for Best Picture. Lost in Translation, I kind of consider a comedy. Toy Story 3, I consider a comedy. But here's the funny thing that it brings up. It seems like when comedies do other things really well and have other very strong elements, we stop considering them comedies. Like people look at Toy Story 3, we don't consider it at its heart, in the core of its DNA, Toy Story 3 is a comedy. I still contend when you look at the core DNA of Lost in Translation, although some of it's very subtle and some of it is done in really, really clever ways, it at its core is a comedy with a lot of other great quality stuff built around us. And then all of a sudden we disqualify it as the comedy. Mm-hmm. So how can we expect the Academy to nominate comedy films, which I contend they have, when we as audience members almost disqualify comedies when they become great films overall? So that's really more of a commentary on us in the Academy. I don't know, Mark, as a comedian, how do you see that?
I mean, I think that, yeah, Four Weddings and a Funeral, I believe, was nominated as well, and that was primarily considered a comedy too. The biggest thing you need a great narrative, and it needs to do other things than just comedy. Unfortunately, the biggest thing you need is a great PR push from whatever studio released the film, because it's a very different landscape than it was when in 1977 or 1982. You need a company to say, hey, we made this movie, we really believe in it, we're going to push it. So look at a movie like something as far back as Bowfinger or something like Juno, which are great films. They do a lot of things. They're really funny, but they also have heart to them. You can do it, but you need a studio push in order to accomplish that. Now, I was watching The Nutty Professor last night, and while that would never get nominated for Best Picture, and it shouldn't, there is no reason on earth. You cannot tell me that Eddie Murphy did not turn in the best comedic performance and probably the best actor performance of whatever year that movie came out. He's phenomenal in it, but you're just not going to get that recognition until you have a studio backing you to put you on all the billboards and say, hey, consider this.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned Bowfinger. That's one of my all-time favorite comedies that still got no recognition. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's I always hey, if you haven't seen that, that's one of those missed gems. Young Frankenstein. There's so many films that are incredible movies that are comedies that were not nominated, didn't win Oscars. Why? It's the same reason science fiction films and fantasy films and horror films never get nominated for the most part in Oscar territory. It's just genre pictures don't work unless what you said, they have to have this extra flavor where they get taken out of the genre and looked at in a different light that they can actually be nominated. So, I mean, that's my bone of contention with the Academy Awards, but I don't really have that because there's all these other awards shows now that deal with specifically with science fiction or fantasy. There's not really one for comedy, though.
There's one. There used to be. Remember that they had the comedy awards?
Yeah.
For a while. I don't know what happened to
those.
Yeah,
they have a few different award shows for comedy in general, but I don't lose sleep over the fact that comedies don't get nominated enough for Oscars or anything like that. Right. They should, but there's just something that's so subjective about comedy where if you have Julianne Moore and she's slowly losing her memory to Alzheimer's, you can watch that film and say, man, that's really sad. We collectively as a group of people can say, man, this is really depressing. This is dramatic. But then you put on something like 22 Jump Street or Ted 2. Some people are going to find that hysterical. Other people are going to say, it's a talking bear. That's the movie. Okay. So we don't get it. And we're not going to go see this movie.
Right. Or if you were laughing at the Julianne Moore one, you've got problems. It's so funny that she's forgetting things. This comedy's amazing.